The Iranians have zero interest in talking to Trump. They will not talk with him. They will not talk with the United States representatives. And this is the problem with the media in the United States. They're all deeply compromised, especially Fox News. So he's saying, he said, I think, remember, after 30 days of bombing, the Iranians came to. No, there's nothing to remember. This is just a fabrication. The Iranians right now are sitting and waiting for the next round of conflict. If Trump escalates, the Iranians will escalate.
So the American empire told you that their sanctions on Iran were working. They told you that cutting Tehran off from the global financial system would bring the Islamic Republic to its knees. They told you that controlling the Strait of Hormuz and dominating the world's oil trade through the petrodollar was permanent, unshakable, and beyond challenge.
But the thing is, the Iranian people want to live in peace. They're a very advanced civilization. To think that they're in sanctions and how advanced they are, that's what shook me more than anything else. Because when I was going there, I was expecting to go to Cuba. I was expecting to see a Venezuela. I was expecting to see a North Korea, where there are struggles due to sanctions. That did not happen in Iran. Iran, there's a huge amount of abundance in technology, in food, in culture, in society, and all of these things. But one thing the people want is, as I mentioned, they want a response to the United States of America for killing the supreme leader, for killing those children in Minab. I went to Iran, and it's very clear to me that there was intentional targeting of innocent civilians in Iran. I went to the Jewish synagogue as an example. And I went to the Jewish synagogue, it was hit, and they told me, they said, the reason this Jewish synagogue was struck was because these specific Jews are against Israel.
Right now, as the deranged occupant of the White House rattles his sabers and waves his empty threats at Tehran, a freight train is rolling across the Central Asian steppe, carrying Iranian oil directly into China. And every single mile of that track is a nail in the coffin of American financial dominance. Let me give you the facts first, and then I will give you my honest assessment of what these facts mean. In June 2025, Iran officially launched a new commercial rail route connecting China and Iran. The first cargo train departed from the eastern Chinese city of Xi'an and arrived at the Apron Dry port near Tehran. The total distance covered was approximately 5,300 kilometers. Now understand what this means. A decade ago, this was a dream. Today it is operational reality. The Kazakhstan-Turkmenistan-Iran rail link, which first opened in December 2014, has now been extended and upgraded into a fully functional corridor that moves freight in roughly 15 days, compared to the 30 or 40 days that the same cargo would take by sea. This is not a minor logistical update. This is a fundamental restructuring of how Iran and China do business together, and it has been deliberately designed to make American sanctions irrelevant. Can you see what is actually happening here? The Trump regime is dropping bombs and issuing threats, while China is quietly building the infrastructure that makes those threats meaningless. That is the real story. That is what they will not tell you on Fox News or CNN. While American generals are presenting escalation options to a man who cannot even explain who he is negotiating with in Iran, Beijing is cementing its energy supply lines, locking in its oil purchases, and constructing an entire parallel trade architecture that Washington simply cannot touch. And the Americans genuinely have no answer for this. None. Zero. This rail corridor is the direct product of the $400 billion, 25-year strategic partnership that China and Iran signed in March 2021. That agreement covered trade, investment, energy, infrastructure, and military cooperation. At its core, it guaranteed Beijing a stable oil supply from Tehran. And China put serious money into making this work. Beijing funded the rail extension with 40 billion yuan. That is not charity. That is a calculated strategic investment by a country that understands exactly what it is doing. Iran sits in the center of the Middle East as a bridge between China and Europe. It connects the North-South corridor and the East-West corridor simultaneously. Its geography alone makes it indispensable to China's Belt and Road Initiative, and Xi Jinping has known this from the beginning. Now listen to what popular X-account Geopolitics Awakened wrote about this development. And I quote, "The China-Iran rail link is the most underreported story of 2025. While the media obsesses over Trump's latest bluster, a new trade architecture is being built that makes the petrodollar optional. The Americans built their empire on controlling oil routes. China is building its future by routing around them entirely." End quote. That is precisely correct. And another X-account, Silk Road Analyst, put it even more bluntly, writing, and I quote, "Every train that rolls from Xi'an to Tehran is a vote of no confidence in the US dollar system. Yuan settled, sanction-proof, and completely outside Western banking surveillance. This is what strategic patience looks like." End quote. These are not fringe voices. These observations are being echoed by serious financial analysts at Deutsche Bank and Kepler and trading desks across Asia. The numbers involved here are not trivial. China imported approximately 1.38 million barrels per day of Iranian crude in 2025. It purchases more than 80% of Iran's total oil exports. Nearly 90% of Iran's exports to China consist of oil-based products, petrochemicals, petroleum products, and gases. The rail corridor is now moving freight at a rate of one train every 3 or 4 days since the blockade began on April 13th, up from approximately one train per week before the conflict. Monthly transport volumes through the rail route have reached between 400,000 and 500,000 tons. The rail line is transporting over $25 billion worth of oil to China annually, now supplying around 16% of Beijing's total energy needs. And crucially, every single one of those transactions is settled in Chinese yuan. Not dollars, yuan. That's not all. Iran has begun requiring certain oil-related payments to be settled in Chinese yuan instead of US dollars. Tehran is now allowing selected tankers from friendly countries to transit with payments denominated in yuan or in cryptocurrency stablecoins. Deutsche Bank analysts have assessed that the ongoing conflict is actively triggering the decline of the petrodollar and accelerating the emergence of the petro-yuan system. If Iran continues to impose yuan-denominated transit fees on oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, analysts estimate these tariffs could generate between $40 and $50 billion annually for Iran, primarily in Chinese currency, completely bypassing U.S. sanctions. Under what financial architecture does a country get to impose dollar-based sanctions on a trade corridor that does not use dollars? That is the question that no one in Washington wants to answer. The broader Belt and Road Initiative context here is essential for understanding what China is actually building. The BRI includes more than 140 countries and represents a total investment exceeding $1 trillion over decades. The China-Iran rail corridor is one piece of a much larger puzzle that also includes the international north-south transport corridor backed by Moscow, the potential connection between the Chinese-funded Gwadar port in Pakistan and Iran's Chabahar port, and a transcontinental rail network that links China, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Turkey. In May 2025, senior railway officials from all of these countries met in Tehran specifically to coordinate this transcontinental vision. If Beijing manages to connect Gwadar with Chabahar, it will have what analysts are calling a golden ring, encompassing China, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, and Turkey, a fully integrated transportation network that bypasses every Western-controlled choke point on the planet. Work to expand Chabahar port and connect it to the Iranian railway network by completing 700 kilometers of new track between Chabahar and Zahedan has already accelerated. Both projects are expected to be completed by mid-2026. Now compare that timeline to what Washington is doing. Washington is debating whether to bomb more things. Beijing is building ports. Beijing is laying track. Beijing is creating facts on the ground, or rather facts in the ground, in the form of infrastructure that will still be operating long after whatever the current American president tweets about it today is forgotten. I want to be absolutely clear about something here, because some Western commentators are trying to downplay this. Yes, rail transport cannot fully replace maritime shipping for crude oil at scale. Most of Iran's oil fields are in the south of the country, and the geography does not perfectly favor moving crude oil entirely by land to China's eastern refineries. Rail freight costs are approximately 30% higher than sea shipping. A standard 40-foot container on this route is now costing around $7,000, roughly 40% above normal levels. Iran's land-based oil inventory recently surged to nearly 49 million barrels, creating real storage pressure. These are genuine constraints. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But here is what those analysts who try to dismiss this are deliberately missing. This is not about replacing maritime trade entirely right now. This is about building strategic redundancy. This is about creating a corridor that no American warship can interdict, no American sanction can choke, and no American president can tweet out of existence. That X-account Great Game Observer made this point very well recently, writing, and I quote, "People keep saying the rail line can't replace tankers at scale." That's missing the point entirely. The point is that China and Iran now have a sanction-proof corridor that grows stronger every week. Today it's 400,000 tons a month. In 3 years, it'll be something very different. End quote. Exactly right. The Americans spent decades building a global order premised on maritime dominance and dollar supremacy. What China is doing is methodically building around every single pillar of that order, 1 kilometer of track at a time. Now let me show you exactly what financial analysts are saying about the petrodollar implications, because this is where it gets truly alarming for Washington. The petrodollar system, if you do not know, is the arrangement by which global oil trade is priced and settled in US dollars. This arrangement has underpinned American financial hegemony since the 1970s. It is the reason that countries around the world must hold dollars in reserve. It is the reason that American debt remains attractive. It is the reason that Washington can impose financial sanctions at all, because so much of global trade is routed through dollar-based banking systems that the Americans can surveil and block. Iran, Russia, and China have now created an alternative market of sanctioned oil in which payments are denominated in Chinese currency. This market operates entirely outside Western banking networks and surveillance mechanisms. That is a direct structural attack on the foundation of American power. The U.S. established its global supremacy through controlling vital maritime routes. The failure of the American military to ensure security in the Gulf is now unwinding the very premise on which the petrodollar was built. Every UN-settled oil transaction between Tehran and Beijing is a demonstration that the dollar is no longer the only option for global energy trading. Every train that arrives at the Apron Dry port is evidence that American sanctions have a ceiling, and that ceiling is being tested in real time. One X-account, Dollar Decline Watch, summarized this with brutal clarity, writing, and I quote, "The petrodollar required the U.S. to be the guarantor of Gulf security. The moment that guarantee became questionable, the logic of the entire system started to crack. We are watching that crack widen in real time." End quote. I could not have said it better myself. Can you observe the devastating toll that one uncontrolled entity's aggressive foreign policy is having on America's own long-term financial interests? The Netanyahu-controlled Trump administration is so consumed with satisfying its Israeli masters, so busy bombing Iranian infrastructure and threatening escalation that it cannot see what is being built right in front of its eyes. While CENTCOM is presenting escalation options, China is completing railway electrification upgrades. While Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth sit obediently receiving instructions from war criminal Netanyahu at Lindsey Graham's funeral, Xi Jinping's engineers are surveying the route to connect Gwadar and Chabahar. This is what strategic incompetence looks like. This is what happens when your foreign policy is outsourced to a genocidal rogue state that cares nothing about American long-term interests. The new meeting in Tehran in May 2025 among senior railway officials from Iran, China, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Turkey was not just a technical discussion. It was a geopolitical declaration. It was these countries collectively saying to Washington that they are building a parallel world, a Eurasian trade architecture that operates independently of Western financial systems, Western maritime choke points, and Western sanctions regimes. Turkey's growing alignment with this bloc is particularly significant given that Ankara is a NATO member. Even NATO cohesion is being strained by the gravitational pull of this emerging Eurasian network. And it is Iran, the country that the Americans have been trying to strangle economically for decades, that sits at the geographic heart of all of it. My assessment tonight is simple and direct. The petrodollar is not going to collapse overnight. The maritime trade routes are not going to stop functioning tomorrow. China cannot move the same volume of crude by rail that it can by sea, at least not yet. But what the China-Iran rail corridor represents is something more important than immediate volume. It represents the proof of concept. It proves that you can build an integrated, sanction-proof, dollar-free trade corridor connecting the world's largest energy producer with the world's largest energy consumer. And once that proof of concept exists, once the infrastructure is in place, and the financial systems are synchronized and the relationships are deepened, you can scale it. And that is exactly what Beijing intends to do. The Apron Dry Port near Tehran is not just a logistics facility. It is a symbol. It is the physical manifestation of what happens when the world's patient powers decide they have had enough of American financial coercion and start building alternatives. The 10,400-kilometer corridor from Xi'an to Tehran, running through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, bypasses the Strait of Hormuz entirely. It bypasses the Malacca Strait. It bypasses every single naval choke point that the American military has spent a century positioning itself to control. And every time a train makes that journey, every time an oil payment clears in yuan rather than dollars, every time a new section of track is laid connecting Chabahar to the wider Iranian railway network, the leverage that Washington has over this part of the world diminishes just a little bit more. The Trump regime can bomb Iranian facilities. It can threaten escalation. It can send Khalid bin Salman back home with a non-answer and keep fooling the American public with fake claims about diplomatic progress. But it cannot unbuild what China and Iran are building. It cannot unsign the $400 billion strategic partnership. It cannot unlay the track. It cannot unsettle the yuan transactions that have already cleared. That is the reality. And while the deranged occupant of the White House goes on Truth Social to threaten the destruction of Iranian civilization, the freight trains keep running, the yuan keeps flowing, and the architecture of a post-petrodollar world keeps taking shape, one rail car at a time. This is why the old Gulf security architecture is collapsing. It was built to protect a dollar-based system that is no longer the only game in town, and for the final touch of irony. As these trains roll across Central Asia, bypassing the U.S. blockade, they aren't looking for dollars at the border. Reports suggest that even the transit tolls are now being paid in Chinese yuan. The petrodollar isn't just being challenged, it's being ignored. The Iron Silk Road is open, and the map of the world just got a lot smaller for Washington. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.